Okay, so shall we get started? I'd like to start by welcoming both committee members and those members of the public and press who have joined us today for this Audit and Accounts Committee meeting at New Shire Hall. I'd just like to say briefly from a personal point of view, I'm hoping that contributions can be kept rather pithy and succinct today, and that we can finish the meeting on schedule, because I have an appointment in Cambridge to row in the town bumps at 5 o'clock. So just to say that I don't in any way want to curtail debate, whether it be of a political or an apolitical nature though. County Council allows filming and photography at its public meetings, so please feel free to take pictures and tweet during the meeting. Can I ask, though, that everyone present turns their mobile phones to silent or vibrate whilst the meeting is taking place? Please be aware that this meeting is being live streamed and that a recording of the meeting will be available to view on the County Council's website. There are no fire alarm tests scheduled for today, so if alarm sounds, please leave by the nearest marked fire exit, which is through the middle doors on my left, past the toilets and kitchen, and assemble in the car park. So the first item is apologies and declarations of interest. Dawn, do we have any apologies?
Chair, we have apologies from councillors Taylor, Whelan and Wilson. We have councillors Ferguson, Batchelor and Gough substituting respectively. We also have apologies from Stephen Moyer.
Thank you, Dawn. Does any member wish to declare any disclosable pecuniary or non-statutory disclosable interest? Okay, thanks. We'll take that. There are none. The next item on the agenda is petitions and public questions. Dawn, have we received any petitions or public questions?
No, Chair.
Thank you. So item 3 is the minutes of the last meeting on the 31st of May. We're being asked to approve the public minutes of the meeting as an accurate record. Does any committee member want to raise a question on the accuracy of the minutes only? I see no objections, so we will take that as carried unanimously. Okay, so moving on to agenda item 4, the action log. An updated action log was included in the published papers for the meeting. Are there any updates or questions on this, or can we take it as noted? Dawn?
The only thing I was going to say was the procurement training has been confirmed for 7th of October at noon, and all members should have received an invitation.
Thank you, Dawn. So we will, with that addition, we will take the action log as noted and move on to agenda item 5, which is a important and big one, the draft Cambridgeshire County Council Statement of Accounts. Can I ask Stephen Howarth, Head of Finance, to introduce this report? I would just say before Stephen starts that the draft accounts were circulated rather late, and it has been a bit difficult to fully assimilate them in the time available. So I'm hoping that you will be able to fill us in a fairly detailed way on this, Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, hopefully 2 of my colleagues will be joining remotely as well, if they're not online already, to provide any more assistance in answering any technical questions, as well as the preparers of the accounts. So if they are there, or when they do come, they are Ellie Todd, who's the manager of our corporate finance team, and Michelle Parker, who is our lead accountant for close down and the preparation of these accounts. So yes, Chair, thank you. As you say, this is the draft statement of accounts for the year ending 21-22. As you say, it was circulated rather late, as the regulatory deadline currently for publishing the draft statement of accounts is the 31st of July, and work does continue on the preparation of those accounts through pretty much close to that deadline. And while we call it the draft statement of accounts in this paper, in reality it is sort of a first version of those draft accounts. with the final full draft accounts being published close to that 31st of July deadline. So in being the first cut of the draft statement of accounts, there are a couple of statements and notes which are not yet included, which are set out in the report. In particular, the cash flow statement, which is one of the key financial statements, is at the time of publication of these papers was not yet complete. But by the time we do publish the full set of draft accounts, the missing statement and the missing notes will be there to review. The other aspect of this being a first cut is that it only includes the Cambridgeshire County Council element of the draft accounts. When the full draft accounts are published, as well as the complete Cambridgeshire County Council set, they are consolidated up in the same document into a set of group accounts, which factors in accounts from the wider group, which includes This Land's accounts. The This Land accounts are prepared by This Land and are currently subject to audit there, and the pension fund accounts as well. I think the pension fund accounts are being reviewed next week by Pensions Committee. The other aspect to the statement of accounts is the annual governance statement, which is included in the draft accounts that you've got before you as well. So really the purpose of bringing these here ahead of them being complete and ahead of the 31st of July deadline is to give you any opportunity to comment on them ahead of publication or comment on the elements that are there and complete ahead of publication. What I should say is that the full set of complete full accounts signed and audited will eventually be reviewed by this committee. You're just getting the first draft here. They'll be reviewed by committee much later in the year once the external audit process has been concluded or largely concluded, and then there is an audit results report to look at alongside it. So before these are finalized finally, you will be looking at the full set of accounts later in the year, including the audit results report as well. I'll also say that these financial accounts do sit alongside our management accounts, which are published for the 21-22 financial year as the Integrated Finance Monitoring Report that went to S&R Committee in June. They are prepared on different bases. The management accounts are a bit more discrete, narrow and internally focused, but they do both provide complementary useful information to members and to the public. And then finally, by way of introduction, I'll say that once the draft accounts are published on the 31st of July, they will be subject to external audit. We're expecting that to commence in the middle of September through to November. And the deadline under current regulations for publication of the final accounts is the 30th of November, I think. So there is a theoretical window by which the final statement of accounts could be published on time. But members will know from the journey of the 2021 accounts that can be delayed by things that arise during the audit or through national issues such as infrastructure accounting, which has caused issues with the sign-off of the previous year's accounts. So while the audit starts in the middle of September, but preparatory work for that audit will commence pretty soon after the publication of these full set of draft accounts. So I'll leave it there by way of introduction, Chair. As I say, I've got colleagues joining who can answer any particularly technical questions as well. But we welcome any questions and comments.
So are there any questions or comments for Stephen at this stage? Yeah, Councillor Sharp.
Yes, I'll kick it off for want of a better word. And I've got some more detailed questions, which I'll leave till later. It might be slightly digressing by this, but looking at the narrative, when we sat here last time, we were talking about the sign off of the accounts. I noticed the 2021 accounts have not been signed off. Just really an idea of when they will be, and also leading on from that is obviously we had a long discussion about the value for money audits going back. And we sort of, I think it's fair to say that the chairman grilled BDO quite hard. And I just wondered what movement we've got on those at the moment, because obviously the longer that delays, then it delays EY starting their bits, if that makes sense.
So in terms of the 2021 accounts, I'll let Tom answer on the value for money side after, but in terms of the 2021 accounts, we are in the final stages, we think, of getting those signed off. There's a few residual queries with the external auditor, and because of this slight slippage, we're having to provide a bit of a top up on the going concern elements as well. But we are hopefully going to be getting those signed off within the next few weeks.
Thank you. And then on BDO, since the last committee, myself, the Chief Executive and the Chair of this committee have followed up and engaged with BDO. They, as we heard at the last committee, they committed, I think, to delivering their remaining work on the outstanding objections by the end of August. What they've done since that meeting is provide in writing a detailed timescale for how that's achievable, and are providing fortnightly, or due to provide fortnightly, updates on how that's progressing. We've had a number of those updates since we last met, and it's fair to say we have seen some slippage against the timescales as originally set out. But BDO have also reprogrammed that and are still suggesting at this stage they're on course to deliver those determinations by the end of August. The final stages involve review by the quality partner and BDO's internal checking procedures, and then it's submitted nationally to PSAA. And they're assuming there's a pretty quick national turnaround at the moment to meet that August deadline. So I guess that may be one risk. But as the committee heard at the last committee, it will, as has been said, very advantageous to for those matters to be determined so that we can move on to the subsequent years.
Perhaps I could just add to that. I think the situation with BDO is extremely unsatisfactory, and even after the pressure that was placed on them at the last meeting, their timelines still seem to be slipping really quite badly. And I wonder if we should press the issue of fees. It really isn't acceptable for them to be receiving six-figure fees from us and not actually producing what they've been contracted to do. I would also note that I saw in the local paper they've just opened a new office in Cambridge with 20 bright and shiny new people. So yeah, it's not a good situation. Councillor Bowden, Chris.
Thank you very much indeed, Chairman. I'm not a great fan of local authority accounts. I haven't been for a very long time, because they don't really serve a very useful function so far as the vast majority of the users of the accounts are concerned. Hardly any of the members of the authority really understand them. Hardly any external people who want to see them really understand what they say. They're excessively lengthy, and to a non-professional, they are largely impenetrable. But every now and again, government comes along and tries to make an improvement. And the most recent improvement we had to make it more understandable was the creation of a narrative report. Now, what the narrative report actually does is just make the whole set of accounts even longer, and there's more which actually needs to be looked at. But that was put forward by government and has been in our accounts now for several years. But I have to say, I'm not impressed by the fact that Cambridgeshire County Council's narrative report is 27 pages long. I've been looking at some other local authority narrative reports in recent weeks for the same reason I'm looking at this narrative report. And in other authorities, they are managing to get a narrative report which is significantly shorter than 27 pages. And given that the narrative report is meant to be something which is easily digestible by, or should be easily digestible by the average voter, let alone by anyone else, I really think that 27 pages may be pushing it. And I just wonder in future, I'm not asking for any change this year, of course, but I wonder in future if some thought could be given to whether something more abbreviated may be helpful so that it actually fulfills the function that government claimed that it was meant to fulfill.
Thank you for that comment, Councillor Bowden. It is true that the accounts get sort of longer and longer every time the government does try to introduce a attempt to simplify them. The narrative report, I think you are correct to raise the length of it, and we will review that. I think certainly in producing next year's, and we might have a look, see if we can look at that ahead of the publication of the final accounts. But the narrative report, there is guidance, right? It's not just free for all for councils to put in there what they want. It does serve a purpose. There is some guidance around it saying, it has to summarize what funding we get in, what we spend it on, and say what the key deliverables against the corporate priorities were in the year of account. And Cambridge County Council certainly is quite a complex organisation, and it does take a it's going to take a fair bit of text, or at least a fair few pages with information on, to get across all of that information. Really, and I'm not in looking at other county councils' accounts. I've certainly in the region seen ones that are longer and more impenetrable, I think, than Cambridge's. But it's a good point, and we'll certainly keep it under review. I will certainly, yeah.
Thank you, Stephen. Henry.
Thank you, Chair. I suppose my point really, or my question really, follows on from that of Councillor Bowden's. I'm obviously just a substitute on this committee, so haven't had the privilege of looking at the draft reports from last year either. So I just wondered, rather than read through the narrative report and then the draft accounts in their entirety, if there was a flavour you could give us of how they compare this year to last year, or equally if there's any highlights, or on the same level any glaring differences that we weren't expecting. Appreciate that's quite a general question, and one that you may not be able to simply answer. But in the interest of trying to simplify the process, I thought I'd give you the chance to give it a go. Thank you.
What a job to do in a few seconds. And I'll attempt to give it a brief summary of them, I suppose, and my colleagues can jump in if I do miss anything that's key. And the reason when I did the introduction, the reason I drew attention to the council's management accounts is that in a lot of cases, those management accounts provide a more timely and penetrable, for want of a better word, view of the council's situation. So they do feed through into these accounts, the management accounts, and you will see from the key statements, which are the income expenditure statement, balance sheet, and the movement in reserves. Sort of the council's underspend for the year 21-22 is there and feeds through into the general fund. Anybody who followed Strategy and Resources Committee will know that was about an £18.5 million underspend in 21-22, driven by a variety of factors that were spoken about at length at that committee. Where these reports can get slightly more confusing to anybody reading them is that number is then, there's several things added into that number that can change what is a, so for instance, I'm looking at the income and expenditure statement on page 41, I think it is, where we've got the surplus on provision of services, but then things are added to it, in particular a remeasurement of the pension liability, which adds in hundreds of millions of pounds worth of comprehensive income into the statement. So I think it's bearing in mind the feed through from management accounts into these accounts as well. So that's probably the main thing I would draw out in terms of that. And the other aspect which links to that is that because of the underspend, the usable reserves available to the council does increase. So that underspend goes into the general fund, although in the current financial year, S&R committee has further earmarked some of that. And the balance sheet is also a good way to compare previous year to the current year on several key bits of the council's assets and liabilities. So you can see sort of the debtors position, the cash position being relatively stable there, and our overall borrowing position. And that's possibly one of the easiest ones to look at in terms of comparing previous year to the current year. I'll leave it there by a brief introduction to that.
Okay, thanks, Stephen. Perhaps I could add to that or ask a question. Are management accounts available to members if they wish to see them? Because certainly in my college, it's the same situation. The statutory accounts are very difficult to understand, but the management accounts are quite clear and useful.
So pretty much every committee meeting gets a set of management accounts, and S&R committee does get a set of the management accounts, the integrated finance monitoring report at each of its meetings. Those are available in the committee papers, obviously, for that, and we do publish them on the website with a slight lag as well. I think either in the draft accounts before you, or certainly when they're published, there will be a link to the management accounts included within that as well.
Okay, thanks very much, Chris.
Thank you very much indeed, Chairman. And may I congratulate Stephen on managing to answer Councillor Batchelor's question so succinctly. I didn't know how long you were going to take to answer that question. I thought that was a superb answer, so well done. Especially given that you didn't have notice of it, so well done on that. I don't want to open this subject for debate here, Chairman, but I would like to flag it up because we're going to be seeing the consolidated accounts coming forward. This isn't the last time we'll be seeing these figures, although not necessarily quite in this form. And I would like to request that at an appropriate point when we are seeing the next iteration of these figures, or the one after that, that a particular note is made of city deal accounting and the way in which it has been treated. And the reason is, as you know, Chairman, there has been considerable concern expressed by a small number of individuals for a number of years about that matter. And there have been allegations made, very serious allegations. And the two of the most serious, I believe, being deliberate fraud and that the council's going concern position has been hidden by the accounting treatment. Now, both of the, in my opinion, both of those allegations are completely and utterly groundless, but they are very serious allegations made over a long period of time, and they have been amplified to some extent in some of the local press as well. So my request is that at one of the next times that these figures are coming before us in one form or another, that we have a specific mention of those allegations and the fact that our auditors, our staff, and also I think all of the members of this committee are absolutely convinced that those allegations are without foundation whatsoever.
Thank you. Could perhaps add to that the matter has been published in private eye again just in the last issue, although in this case no individuals have actually been named in it. I'll see if I can take a photo of it and circulate it to the committee.
Thank you. My system's frozen, so I'm gonna have to do it from memory. Just a couple of points, really. And I very quickly been through the accounts, and like Councillor Bowden, I'm used to UK GAAP and IFRS, having produced executive agency accounts for a government department. But I just wanted to tease out a couple of things. I noticed there's an increase in borrowing. It's only 3 or 4 million, so it'd be useful at some stage to understand that. But also, usable reserves have gone up on page 42 by 52 million. And the final thing, touching on management accounts, certainly, I'm sure you do it, but it's normal for a reconciliation between the management accounts and the final accounts. So I think that might be useful at some stage for those of us who are a bit nerdy on these sort of things to have that, and obviously other members of the committee as well. But those are my 3 points. There was something else, but say my system's frozen. I can't get to it now. Thank you.
Thank you. I will pass over potentially to one of my colleagues to answer in detail on the usable reserves figure, but on the borrowing side, I can't pull out the exact figure, but the capital program is expanding, and we would potentially expect there to be an increase in borrowing year on year. And then on the usable reserves and on the reconciliation of management accounts, I think some of that will be in one of the missing notes that does do that. But if Michelle or Ellie know off the top of their head why the usable reserves figure has gone up by such a value, I'll invite them to chime in. It might be that they don't, however, because that note might not yet be fully complete.
And Stephen, do you have any comments on Councillor Bowden's point as well?
Yes, on the city deal. So there is a section in the report in the critical judgment section which sets out our current in the 21-22 financial year's treatment of the city deal. It's potentially that we could, when we bring the eventually bring the final set of accounts with the paper, the covering paper, we might want to draw members' attention to it, given the scale of interest relative to other parts of the accounts. Yes.
So questions? Oh,
thank you, Chair. I would just like to say actually that I found actually these quite easy to read accounts, and I quite appreciated the narrative, and sort of congratulations to whoever wrote the narrative, because I personally thought it did the purpose of giving an overview, which then led one to be able to explore other areas of the accounts and the notes where one's interest was piqued. In that spirit, and just for one of those areas which did pique my interest, there's been quite a substantial increase in the net liability of the pension liability. And this is an area where I thought actually a little bit more detail was required, because in the narrative it's described as a change in the liabilities, but actually if you look at the supporting notes, it's obviously a movement between two very large numbers. It's actually more due to the increase in the value of the assets than it is actually the change in the benefit obligation. So I just thought that was one area, for example, where it could be a little clearer. And I think, that is, what I noticed is that in most cases where the narrative, you read the narrative and you looked at the supporting notes and there was a coherence, but that was one example where I thought a little bit further explanation would be required. Thank you.
I definitely welcome the question on that, because it is one of the standout numbers in the accounts. It's a very large number. Some of this will be to do with, there's a table it features into note 31, I think. Some of this will be to do with the underlying actuarial assumptions that go into the numbers. So I think from the summary table that's included there, some of this will be due to assumptions around longevity of pensioners, to use technical and possibly unfortunate terminology, going down compared to the previous year, and also rates of increase in salaries and what have you, increasing relative to 2021. If Michelle early doesn't know any more about the pension question, they can come in. But I also think Michelle maybe wanted to answer about the usable reserves question potentially. I saw her unmute.
Okay, so if there are no more questions from members, perhaps we can ask Michelle to talk.
Thank you. I will try and remember all of the questions. Please prompt me if I missed your particular question. In terms of the usable reserves, that analysis work is one of the few pieces that we still have not yet completed. And when we look at the actual figure on the balance sheet, the movement is actually 30 million. But that will be to do with the impacts of the things like the way that the accounting treatments feed through, and that will be more properly explained in the next version of the draft accounts, or the final version of the draft accounts. The pensions, yes, you're absolutely correct. The change is much more driven by an improvement in the asset valuation for this year, much more so than expected. And we can certainly amend the wording in the narrative report to make that clear. There is also a change in liability, as there is every year, which is driven, as Stephen has rightly said, by the actuarial adjustments, and inflation and discount rates are the main driver this year on that.
Okay, thank you, Michelle. Are there any points that members would like to address to Michelle? Alan?
Yeah, sorry, thank you. That was very useful, Michelle, because obviously I looked at the actual notes of the accounts rather than the actual balance sheet. And I think there's a couple of things to say, and I've been at the coalface here, so I know the pressure that Stephen and Tom are under, having experienced it. But I was just thinking whether, and obviously it's really my first time looking at these accounts, although I did look at them draft last year. I just wonder whether in future we delayed the audit committee slightly, so that we fix the time in when we get a full set of accounts that we can actually then comment about, rather than obviously here where we've got bits. And it's not a criticism, please don't take that as criticism. And the second point is what Councillor Goff mentioned, is the pensions number is probably one of the biggest ones in the balance sheet, if not the biggest, and it moves mainly because of the actuarial revaluations, and whether it will be useful, maybe as part of the narrative. Sorry, Chris, that it's going to increase the narrative, but there's a summary. So those are members of the public who are not
I think that's probably a very fair comment on the whether we should be drawing out slightly more in the narrative that pensions number an issue, because a lay reader will spot the several £100 million line and rightly wonder what that is. And we'll try and, if we do include something, we'll adopt a bit of a one in, one out rule at the very least in the narrative statement to not increase the length. On the timing, I think last year's committee was about the same time as well, and there's always a slight tension between getting the papers, getting a committee in before the publication deadline, and also getting the papers to the committee as early as possible to enable you to read through. So even if we timed it perfectly, there would always be at least a week between publication for the report for this committee and the final publication. And that is going to be a very busy week, whatever, and things will still change then. So I think we will try to get them as close as possible and get as good a final version to you as we can. But as you know, Michelle and Ellie particularly are being incredibly industrious this week and next week to get the final report pulled together.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. Are there any more questions or comments from members to Michelle or Stephen? In that case, we'll move on to the debate, if there be any. Is there anyone that wants to speak on this? Okay, so we'll take that as being completed. So we'll move to the recommendation, and that is to note and comment on the preliminary draft of the Cambridgeshire County Council elements of the Council's Statement of Accounts for 2021-2022 prior to their incorporation into the Council's full draft Statement of Accounts for 2021-2022, which are due to be published by the 31st of July. Can we all agree to that? Is anyone against? Okay, well, that is passed then. So we'll move on to item 6, which is membership of the Audit and Accounts Committee. And Tom's going to lead on this.
Thank you. This report considers the existing constitutional provision to co-opt members of this committee who are independent or from an apolitical background. To date, the committee has not utilised those provisions, but taking account of the SIPFA provision statement, SIPFA position statement, and the emerging national position where a legislative change on this has been recommended to come forward, it's something that the committee may now wish to consider. I think the advantages of independent members have been recognised elsewhere in the sector, and that's why they feature in those national recommendations. Co-opted members can bring additional knowledge and skills to the committee, alternative perspectives, different expertise, and an ability to interact with some technical information. As we've just seen, the accounts are a very technical document, and would certainly come from a different and perhaps more detached perspective from members of the council necessarily would. So the report then proceeds to set out a proposal for taking this forward, which would include open advertisement of the positions, being clear that the co-optees would need to be apolitical and have that expert perspective. It suggests it be advantageous to offer a honorarium or basic allowance as part of that process, in common with what we've seen in some other councils that have gone down this route, and confirms the current constitutional position that the roles would be non-voting. So the report sets out those issues and invites the committee to support that position and then delegate the further work to bring that through into fruition. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. That's very clear. So I'm certainly strongly in support of this proposal. However, I think it's really very important that we identify the correct areas that the committee needs to have expertise in and the correct individuals. My experience from the audit committee in Cambridge University is that most of the external members do not have any fees or honoraria. However, I do accept that in the current climate and this organisation being significantly different to Cambridge University in that it doesn't have such a large base of alumni with a huge amount of financial experience, that the award of an honorarium is an appropriate thing to do.
Thank you very much indeed, Chairman. I've been involved with local authorities and committees which have had external experts present and participating for 9 years now, on different types of committee, not merely to do with the audit and accounts. So I've seen them in operation and I've seen where the value can lie. There is always a danger, and this comes down to the chairman and making sure that this danger doesn't happen, that the committee gets taken over by the experts so that the members are almost side players, whereas the experts talk to the officers and members are sitting quietly wondering what's going on. And that's just something which we have to be aware of and make sure it doesn't happen. But generally, I've found that the process has been extremely valuable. It is my experience as far as local authorities are concerned that it is really quite common practice that a relatively small honorarium be offered. I wouldn't expect people to be doing this for the money, but it's also appropriate that their time and effort, and they do put time and effort into this. They don't just turn up to the meetings and spout off. They read them. It's my experience. They read their papers and they bring something different to the meetings, which otherwise wouldn't be brought. So I think it is appropriate for there to be a small honorarium as far as that's concerned. I would certainly welcome proposals which are brought forward to allow this to take place. I'm generally very impressed by what's been done, but as far as audit and accounts are concerned, and this particular committee, I personally think if we had such experts, well, such independent individuals with expertise on the committee, we may have reached a resolution on the city deal accounting rather more quickly than we ended up doing. And that's a good example maybe of the way in which having an external voice may have helped to focus attention better at an earlier stage. But as far as this committee is concerned, I'd have thought that the accounts themselves are not that, it's not that valuable to have someone with direct experience of the production of local authority accounts. What is valuable is the risk management side, and having individuals on the risk management side who are able to bring expertise and experience from outside, even outside a local authority arena, I think that is particularly valuable.
Thank you, Chris. Mac.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I mean, I also support this. I think it will bring that benefits to the Audit and Accounts Committee. I'm personally not an accountant, as some of my colleagues around, so I think anything that brings additional scrutiny will help. I just wanted to, though, just question how the two, we're suggesting two, we could have three, but the suggestion is that we have two independent members, how the terms of reference for them will be defined and how they will be chosen. I just want to make sure, don't know whether you want to discuss how that's going to happen, how soon it's going to happen. But just like I was on Children and Young People's Committee, we benefit from independent members who are effectively representing the churches. There is a difference in that they have on some occasions are able to vote, other occasions they're not able to vote. Here we're suggesting non-voting rights. But I think it would be easy for me. I can understand how, as I say, how they're selected and how their terms of reference will be defined.
Thank you. Fiona, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I have just led on this procedure for Peterborough, where we've just recruited 3 independent members in January this year of an exceptionally high standard, and we were really pleased with the response to the advertisement campaign, which we advertised nationally, Financial Times, Guardian, Public Jobs, as well as all the local routes as well. And we've got some of them on appendix 2 of your paper, there are some suggestions for the skills and person specification and so on, but Tom and I needed a bit more work on working that up. There's lots of guidance from CITFA as well on this, and I was surprised by the level of interest shown, especially Peter was obviously a very different council from this one, and it was in considerably worse straits than this one in terms of the state of its audit committee. But actually we got a really good response, so hopefully that will be heartening to you as members in terms of the potential for this to bring benefits to the committee, because since we've got a chair, the chair there is also an independent member, but it has actually improved the members' interactions with the committee agenda as well, rather than putting them in the background. It's actually just encouraged a much higher standard of debate generally. So I'd just like to input that sort of experience for you.
Thank you, Fiona. Alan.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I support this. I think it's anything where we can get expertise that the committee hasn't or the council hasn't got, then that's good. Just a couple of things. One is on 2.4, it mentions 2 members, yet on the appendix 1, it talks up to 3. So is that on the appendix just to give us a bit of flexibility?
Our current terms of reference say that you can co-opt up to 3 co-opted members. So at the moment we're suggesting 2, but it just give us a bit of flexibility. If there were 3 outstanding candidates and you couldn't choose from them, we might want to come back to the committee and ask them whether you wanted to take 3 instead of 2. Okay, so I haven't come back. Yeah, so that just gives us a bit of flexibility in there. And the other point, I don't really want to raise it in some ways, but and if they're asking good questions but being difficult, that's not a problem. I'm just thinking where and I can't think of a situation, but where we have a really difficult situation, how we deal with that within the terms of reference, if you understand. You know, I'm not, if somebody comes along and asks challenging questions, that's brilliant, that's what they should be doing, but I'm thinking of other, if you follow my well, as co-opted members, they would obviously be asked to sign up to the code of conduct in the same way as members. So if there were issues with behavior or whatever, we could take, and there would be sort of an exit strategy. You'd have to reappoint them every so often as well. So if you didn't like them, you could remove that person.
Okay, thank you.
Mac.
Thanks again. I'm not sure I got an answer to part of my question, which was not so much the terms of reference, but you've answered the terms of reference generally, that's explained in the appendices, but it's who will select them. Do they go before a panel of the council, a panel of this committee or whatever? And I was curious because, as you said, I think if I understood you right, Fiona, the PC at Peterborough, it happens that an independent member chairs, and as you know, I think everybody knows rehearsing it, that the view of the opposition on this council is that we should ideally have somebody who is not a member of the administration, but that's beside the point. If they're a non-voting member, I'm just curious how a chairman becomes a non-voting member, but presumably he just won't even have a casting vote, let alone a vote. How that works, that's just good. So the question for you, Chair, is when and who will make the actual selection at the end of the day, really? Is, you know.
Yeah, Tom will.
Or Tom will ask.
I think so. Subject to the committee supporting today, there may be there may just be a question for full council as well around the honorarium point. That's not currently in the scheme, so we would just need to look at whether that needed a full council revision in the early autumn. And then I think what we've begun to set out and suggest is that the officers can proceed in kind of to agree the specification for the roles, and obviously between 2 roles we can probably get more breadth of experience, and then that would be advertised nationally. And then suggesting that there is a private interview process involving a number of the members of the committee, but probably not the whole committee. And then the actual final decision on co-option as currently drafted, I think would have to come back to the committee for decision, is my understanding.
So they could separate, and presumably constitute an ethics would have to get involved, would they?
Your terms of reference currently allow for co-opted members, so you're already allowed to do that, as this committee has the authority to do that. Doesn't need to go anywhere else. There will be, I think, some tweaks to this committee's terms of reference that will need to go through full council as a constitutional change. Just picking up on the point about the co-opted members, the way we've done it at Peterborough is the vice chairman essentially has a casting vote because there's an independent chair, but there's no requirement to have an independent chair, as I think was in the briefing note for the motion at council. It was simply that the external assurance report that we got for Peterborough commented specifically on the chairing of the meeting, and so it was felt useful in that situation.
So in 2.6, it talks about the term of the appointment being 4 years with an absolute limit of 8 years. I presume that will be from when they're appointed. We won't try and tie that into the election cycle, because I think there might be a benefit of having that continuity of expertise, because all of us might be unelected in a little under 3 years, and having somebody who's had the experience of the committee might be quite useful. That's all.
Thank you. Any more comments or questions from members? In that case, move to the recommendation. In listening to the discussion, I'd like to suggest a slight tweak to part B of this. Just air this before we go to the vote on it. It says that consultation with the chair and vice chair of the committee at the moment. I wonder if one of the Conservatives might like to also be consulted. Would that be sensible? And perhaps you'd like to nominate one of you, maybe you or Alan. Okay, thanks, Chris. Okay, recommendation is to support the co-option of 2 independent apolitical persons to this committee in accordance with proposal in the report, and B, to delegate to the section 151 officer and monitoring officer in consultation with the chair, vice chair and councillor Bowden, authority to agree a detailed specification for the role and invite applications, taking account of any matters decided by full council in due course. Are we all in agreement with that? Thank you very much. Okay, so next we'll move on to the internal audit report, and I believe that Mairead is presenting on this via Zoom. So over to you, Mairead.
Thank you, Chair. Hi, everyone. So I'm bringing you our regular internal audit progress report. There hasn't been a huge amount of time since our last update to the committee, so it's a relatively I'll just report quickly the few key areas. And if anyone has any
did
questions.
you want to take your camera off because we're having trouble with the audio?
Oh, yeah. How is that? Is that any better?
Yes, that's great. Thank you.
Lovely. Sorry, it's probably my internet. Okay, so a few key things to note as we run through the report. There's one audit which has had a limited opinion on system controls. That's been the review of contract management of the Healthy Child programme, which is run under a Section 75 agreement. So as normal with anything that's got a limited opinion, we've given a summary of the key findings at section 4.1. And I would note that actually the actions for that audit that have been due to be completed by now have all been completed. We've reviewed and revised the audit plan for the next 4 quarters. That's set out at section 6 for comment challenge. Part of the change has been to reflect reduced resourcing in the team for the next quarter. So that's just worth being aware of. Section 7 of the report covers follow-ups of overdue actions from previous audits. And there's not a huge amount of overall change from our last report. It is worth noting we still have one outstanding essential action, and that's around the council reobtaining public services network certification. That is now getting close to being resolved. I think in Annex B to our report, it mentions that the service were hoping to put in their application for recertification on around the 8th of July, I think it was, and that has been delayed slightly, but they are at the point of having that application ready to go to the Chief Executive today. So I'm very much hoping that by the time we next come to you, we will have no outstanding essential actions, and that will be completed. Brief update on risk management. So there'll be a full update in September after the corporate risk register goes to strategy and resources in August. Internal Audit are doing some work introducing a new process, which is around challenging and assuring individual risks on the corporate risk register. We think that's going to be really helpful for both committees to gain better assurance over the corporate risk register, and those reports will be reflected in the next Internal Audit progress update to yourselves. Whistleblowing and fraud. So updates provided at section 9 on our open whistleblowing cases. The next round of the National Fraud Initiative is taking place in the autumn. So we're just starting to gear up to arrange data collection for that and make sure we've got processes in place so that we can take part in that national exercise. And then finally, key financial systems. So Cambridgeshire Internal Audit have finished all our in-house reviews of key financial systems that we do for the Lead Authority Board. We've received a pensions report from West Northants colleagues that gives an opinion of substantial assurance over the adequacy of the system and satisfactory over compliance with the system. We are still awaiting the payroll transactions report, and I am chasing that up. So hopefully by the next report to committee, we'll be able to give you an update on the outcomes of that. Any questions, let me know.
So any questions, Chris?
Thank you, Chairman. I've got a feeling I've asked my first question before at some stage in the last 7 years, and I've forgotten the answer. And it's to do with Annex B, which was mentioned, the summary of outstanding recommendations and the essential recommendations overdue. Yep. And the risk level is given in the report, and we have the letters E, I, M, and H for the risk level. And I could solidly guess what 2 of those mean, but I just wonder if it could be made quite clear what are E, I, M, and H, and in future, if we could have a little key on here so that it's clear what E, I, M, and H mean.
Yep, absolutely. And I would note actually it's particularly confusing because we're shifting from an old system to a new system. So we're moving towards having high, medium, low, which should be a little bit simpler. But previously we had essential and important. So I will put a key on for next time. Apologies.
Mac.
Thank you, Chairman. As I said earlier, I'm the accountant, so I actually need the narrative to help me through this. So, Mike, I've got a number of points I wanted to raise, which are probably related to my trying to read the report. But if I look at, first of all, on the covering report on paragraph 3.2, where it talks about the IT health check, the final sentence in 3.2 says the service aimed to submit this in July this year and hope to achieve Psn certification shortly thereafter. I think I understand the point that's been made. I just wondered if we have an update. I know we're still in July, but it would be useful to know whether or not they're going to be making that report. As I go in, oh, sorry, yeah, do you want Marie to answer them as I go along? Because I've got a number of points. But
if you can take a few points at a time, Marie, that would be.
All right, so I'll just carry on.
That's fine.
Yeah, fine. Yeah, and in the actual update report itself, I did have a problem understanding. I was looking at the table in 3.1, the finalized assignments, and I'm looking down that, trying to understand it. I came to under assignment, it said contain management outbreak funding. And I thought, cool, an outbreak of management, that'd be good. Then if you look at the actual acronym, it's COMF, and that occurs again in 5.2, 5.2.1. I presume that COMF is right, that it should be contain outbreak management because it's something to do with COVID. But if that could be corrected, I still don't understand quite what it means, but it didn't make sense in the way it was written. And then in terms of the number of schools that they were assigned a final assignment to, sorry, get me tongue twisted here. It talks about, well, 14 schools were selected. I just wondered how those schools were selected. And are they LEA controlled schools? Are they our schools? I mean, we don't have any, presumably, any way of auditing the schools that are academies or whatever. And I just wondered how those 14 were selected. I think I'll leave it there, Chairman. I think that's probably enough points to pick up. Oh no, there was one final one, if I may, Mary. In 4.13, it talks about the internal audit opinion on the control environment, it being limited, and it talks about problems with the pricing schedule, and it seems to be inferring that Peterborough has got the same problem, and I just wonder how, there's something missing in the middle. If they're looking at it the same way as we're looking at it, then there's something missing in the middle. So presumably Peterborough City Council have got a similar problem and have raised this. So I'm not sure who's best to answer that. And I just wondered how that's going to be, they could control that in the future. Okay.
Great.
That makes sense?
Okay. Yep. I think I'm with you. So just shout if anything I'm saying isn't quite what you're after. So in terms of the PSN certification, so that is the Public Services Network certification. So they're hoping to get that submitted today. My understanding is that as of now, it has gone to the chief executive, who needs to sign off the, essentially they have to produce an action plan that gets signed off by the chief exec. Then that's submitted to PSN, who will review it and get back to us. So I believe that that is underway now. Conf, you're correct. It should be Contain Outbreak Management Funding. It is one of the COVID grants we've had. So apologies for getting the words around. It's a strange name for a grant, but yes, you're correct. So that was just one of the big COVID grants that the authority received kind of in 2020 and 2021. Schools. So we select schools on the basis of risk. So we do create a risk assessed sample. We produce essentially a large spreadsheet. It's all local authority maintained schools, and we actually include nurseries on that spreadsheet too, for the few nurseries that we have within our remit. And then we risk rate the list on the basis of a number of factors. So we liaise with the schools intervention service to get information about any schools which are on the sort of causing concern list, particularly if that's to do with governance or financial concerns. We also increase risk ratings for schools if they've been through particular changes, such as, a new head teacher or high turnover of governors, things like that. And then we essentially pick the top schools on that list in order to go out and do that visit. We're in the process of picking another sample of schools for our next round of visits. And obviously, if a school's had a visit very recently, then we wouldn't visit them again straight away, even if they do still fall into the higher risk category. So there's also sort of a balance of how recently have we visited them. But we do try to select them on the basis of risk. And then finally, just to talk about the Healthy Child contract. So the contract is a little bit of an odd one. There's one contract with two providers, one provider each for Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, but it's managed jointly by public health across both areas. So this is one of the areas that Internal Audit have had an agreement in place with Peterborough's internal audit team to say we will do this piece of work and cover both areas at the same time as it's most efficient, and we provide a copy of our report to Peterborough's internal audit team so they're aware of the findings of our work. So we have a sort of information sharing agreement with them, and sometimes they will provide us information on work they've done which has covered Cambridgeshire where services are joint, and we share information in that way. The Cambridgeshire team will follow up on the actions from that audit. There aren't really any actions that are sort of for Cambridge only or for Peterborough only. It's all managed by the same team, so we'll just follow them all up.
Could I just follow up on that last point then, Chairman? Just
Yep, that's fine.
When it says a lack of detailed pricing schedule then makes it difficult to implement elements of blah 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 of the contract. So how are you going to overcome that? Is there an ambition that you'll get a much more detailed pricing schedule for both authorities? Well, I mean,
yes,
obviously for Peterborough to sort theirs out, but yeah.
Yes, that's the proposal, and that would be managed for Cambridgeshire and Peterborough jointly by the public health team as sort of a single exercise to go through and develop a more detailed schedule for both sides.
Okay, thank you for that, Chairman.
Henry.
Thank you, Chair. 3 questions taken down to 2 because Councillor Maguire's just asked the one I was going to ask on the Healthy Child programme. So first question, at various points throughout the report, there is mention of the new head of diligence. I assume that's Neil Hunter, but I wondered if you could confirm that is.
Yes,
and then,
you're correct.
Good, tick. And then second, I think you may have mentioned this in your preamble, but the payroll audit that we were waiting for some reports from West Northants on. Did I hear you say that those had now been received and we weren't awaiting anything further from them?
No, so unfortunately we have not had the payroll transactions report yet, and I'm continuing to chase colleagues in West Northants on that.
Okay, understood.
Neil. Yeah, I've got 2 points. One is just to push a little bit further on the point which Mac raised on Section 75 agreement. So my reading of the audit conclusion on this was that there's basically some lack of some basic elements in the agreement, which meant that certain management and oversight and scrutiny of the value of those contracts and the way in which that contract worked, or that agreement worked, couldn't be done. That was my interpretation. So the first part of that is, as you correctly say, from your comments, being covered by the actions, which is to make sure that those elements of the agreement are now in place. But then the second part of that is, what are we doing to make sure that then those elements enable the process to take place of testing the way in which that agreement is working and that is delivering value, and that the payments under that agreement are appropriate. So question is, are you going to go back again for the second part of that to make sure that the scrutiny of that agreement is undertaken? Or if I've misinterpreted the audit conclusion, then please let me know. My second question is about the schools audit. The most striking thing to me is that there was such diversity in the audit conclusions across those schools, and I wondered, in the light of that diversity, do you think there's any kind of concern you have about that, and whether you could comment whether the action which is in 5.2.3, which is updating key guidance documents, is that too light touch, given the diversity of the results from the audit of the sample of the 14 you did? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So just to start with your question around the Section 75 agreement, I think from what you've said, it sounds like, yes, that's exactly what we're trying to say about the findings of the audit. The actions that have been agreed are sort of time linked. So we have some short-term actions, some medium-term actions, and some longer-term actions. So the first part of the work that needs doing on that contract is around establishing detailed pricing schedule. Without that, there are other elements of the contract that cannot be implemented. So that, off the top of my head, I couldn't tell you exactly when, but certainly I think before December, the aim is that the service would have been able to analyse, spend on the contract, agree pricing schedule, and have a formal contract amendment put in place to incorporate that pricing schedule as part of the contract. Then we also have actions which are further in the future around implementing the open book review and the year-end reconciliation of costs elements of the contract, which cannot be done without a proper pricing schedule. So internal audit will be following up to confirm that those processes are being implemented at the date that we've got written down in the action plan. And I have also referred the service who managed the Section 75 agreement to the new head of diligence, who has a lot of expertise in sort of managing contracts and in things like open book reviews, so that they have another source of support and guidance if needed in order to implement those aspects of the contract. And then as for your second question around the schools, yes, I think the diversity in the audit conclusions is interesting. I think it is actually quite positive when you consider that we select schools on the basis of risk. So really we're expecting to be probably making poorer findings rather than better findings in these schools, given that, you know, the whole basis that we have for selecting them is that there is a cause for concern potentially around their governance arrangements. So the action talks about updating key guidance documents. I think that is important and it will make a difference from the centre. But I should note as well that each individual school that has been audited has its own action plan coming out of the audit. So for, you know, specific schools tend to have quite diverse issues. So we have agreed an action plan with every individual school that is presented to governors, and the implementation of that action plan, I believe, is going to be followed up as well. So there is sort of local actions at a school level as well as the corporate actions that we as a council can take to try and provide that advice and guidance to schools on how they should be managing their finances, and what sort of best practice looks like.
Thanks very much, Mairead. Chris.
Thank you, Jim. I've got 3 questions left. The first one is, and it was touched on by Councillor Batchelor, and I must admit I wasn't very happy with the answer that was received. We were told somewhere in the report, I must admit I've lost where it is, but we're told somewhere in the report that we'll be getting a report on payroll reconciliation at our September meeting. But I am disappointed to hear that the payroll audit information from West Northants still hasn't been received. When we have our report in September, is it possible for us to have a fuller report in terms not merely of the processes and accuracy, but also the timeliness of everything to do with payroll reconciliation and payroll audit? Because quite clearly the current situation isn't acceptable. And I'm more interested, to be honest, in looking forwards than looking backwards. I would hate us to be having the same conversation in a year's time, 2 years' time, 3 years' time. So I just wonder if that September report could be more forward-looking as well as backward-looking in terms of how we're not going to be in the same position again in future. That's my first question. Do you want me to give my other 2 questions now? Fine. The second one is one thing which I haven't seen mentioned within this report is any work done. I beg your pardon. Any work done or any coordination on the subject of the single person discount council tax fraud work which has been done. Now, we in this authority, whilst we don't have responsibility for the administration in this authority, we have made a significant financial contribution towards the anti-fraud work which is being done at district and city council levels. And I just wonder if we do anything at all to measure that as far as the work of the internal audit is concerned, or if that's just left to finance. And then my third question is, in general, should we as individual members of this committee, for that matter, as individual members of this council, be able to request sight of individual reports which have been produced by internal audit, rather than just seeing the recommendations and the summary of the conclusions? Now, I do appreciate that some reports clearly would need to be redacted in that case, since it would be inappropriate for some of the data which is given some of the individuals who are identified, and some of the lacunae which may be identified in terms of internal controls. You certainly wouldn't want that to be any more widely publicized than it already is. But it seems to me, in the interests of openness and transparency and us doing our work as members of this committee, that sometimes we may be interested to see more detail than we're given within these reports. And I wonder, as a matter of general principle, if we should be able and allowed, or we are able and allowed, to ask for the detailed report rather than seeing a summary. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor. So I'll go through those one by one. So the first thing I should clarify is that the report on payroll that we will be getting hopefully shortly is not, unfortunately, a report on payroll reconciliations. So this comes back to the issue that was reported at a previous committee around the fact that actually the scope of the audit of payroll, which is being carried out or has been carried out by colleagues, is not covering the payroll control account reconciliations issue, which is sort of the key area of interest for us really in the payroll system at the moment. I have met with other chief internal auditors of the other lead authority councils to just start discussing, you know, things like the scope of audits going forward, to make sure that we're not in this position again of not getting assurance over an area that we're particularly interested in. So absolutely at the September meeting, I can bring an update on that and some more details on the scope that we are agreeing for the payroll and pensions audits, which are provided to us by West Northamptonshire. I believe that the issue around payroll control accounts is continuing to be progressed through the lead authority board, and we do update on that. There's an action in Annex B, which we will continue to follow up to see the progress on that issue. But unfortunately, the payroll transactions report that we receive will not cover that issue. The single person discount council tax fraud work, yes, there has been a fair bit of internal audit involvement in that project. Currently, the project has yet to fully commence as the various parties are still agreeing a memorandum of understanding to form the basis of the project. Audit has done some work around identifying key data sets and liaising with data owners within the business. So we're trying to progress that. I'll bring an update on the council tax single person discount fraud work once that actually has got underway and the data sharing has commenced. And then in terms of the principle around requesting sight of individual reports undertaken by internal audit, yes, committee members can request sight of reports if there's something you're particularly interested in. Equally, you can always request further information in an update, but if you do want to see the full report, you can request that to be provided to the committee, and then we'll have to take that report through the process of redaction before it goes public. But yes, that is something you can do.
Back first.
Just quickly to come back, I am concerned about that, about the payroll control failing, and these things, I'm more than well aware, they can't be turned around on a sixpence. You can't just suddenly fix a problem such as this, but it is an area of high risk in a sense. It's certainly a large number, and it is really important that we do get our act together on this one way or another. And I'm not interested in throwing any blame around on this in terms of looking at another council at the moment, but it's essential from our point of view that this is sorted out as quickly as it can be. And so far as receiving an update on the single person discount fraud work is concerned, I very much look forward to receiving such an update. And when we do, some estimation of the value for money of what money this council is contributing towards that work would be appreciated. And the reason I ask that is to see whether there is any marginal value. I'm interested to know the marginal utility of additional work being done. So having some idea of what we're achieving from the money which we are putting in, and what potentially we could achieve if we put any more money in, would be of interest to me.
Thanks. Tom, you wanted to add?
Yeah, just to provide a couple, some more information on that from management's perspective. So on payroll, there's a number of strands to it, and the audit opinion is just one of those. So myself and the Section 151 officers from North Northamptonshire, West Northamptonshire and Milton Keynes had a detailed deep dive into payroll during June, looking at the services improvement plan and agreeing some additional investment between the four councils to particularly address some of the capacity, resilience, reconciliation issues they've got in the team, and customer responsiveness. But some of the issues there are quite long-standing and complicated, as Councillor Bowden alludes to, are going to take some time to address. There is also some, in terms of managing the overall risk, the CCC finance team has a action plan which it's working on with our payroll contacts as well, to make sure we've got that local understanding of what the reconciliation risk is, and provide some additional assurance to internal audit. And then, as Mairead said, there's the dependency on a different audit team to provide that report, and we are relatively hopeful that that limited report will be available in the near future. And then the council tax project, the county council, as I think Councillor Bowden knows, is incentivising the district councils to participate, and as one of the stumbling blocks actually is that the quid pro quo for that incentivization is that we do need measurement information to come back, and that's just what we're wrestling over, actually, the form and the detail that measurement information takes. So that's the latest on that.
Okay, thanks, Tom. And Mac.
On the an update, the lead authority board, who Murray mentioned, and come up with this. Who comprises that lead board? Because I used to be on the LGSS board when we first started it, so you can blame me, the likes of me, for the fact that we got into that. But I've not personally seen anything come back that shows that there's been elected member involvement, because it's often the best way to address some of these issues, if there's internal issues, is to make elected members on the other partners also involved, so that they're aware of our concerns. So who makes up this board?
Yes, thank you. So the governance system that was devised in succession to LGSS was that instead of a joint committee structure which has member governance at that intercouncil level, individual authorities would lead on individual services, and the governance would interact in that way. So the lead authority board is an officer board which comprises myself, the other 151 officers, one of the chief information officers, and governance support as well. I would certainly say I'm using the device of this committee's interest as a way of energising responses back through that process. So that's been very helpful already. I think subject to the information you get back in September, and I think we do have to recognise some of these, I'm saying to you that some of these problems are being addressed, but it will take some time. But if we are continuing to be not satisfied with the overall payroll position, I think there were probably steps that this committee could take to escalate that position or call in further information from myself and the payroll team, if that's where we are in terms of not having audit assurance on that coming forward.
Are there any more questions or comments from members? In that case, are we all happy to note the report? I take that as carried, and I'd just like to thank Mairead for her excellent work in very difficult circumstances. I know you've had a lot of staff churn and other issues to deal with, so many thanks.
Thank you, Chair.
So moving on to agenda item 8, can I ask Dawn to update on the agenda plan?
I don't think I've got anything to add other than the issue of the independent members. Will timetable that in for some time at future meetings.
Thanks, Dawn. I assume there's no comments or questions on that. So I'd like to thank everybody. This concludes the meeting. Next committee meeting is scheduled for the 29th of September at 2 p.m. I think that overlaps the Labour Party conference, which I'm going to, but maybe we can, Chris.
Chair, when timetables for meetings were used to be created, we always used to block out the party conference period, knowing that we would have members who would be absent for the party conferences. Yeah. May I suggest that that be reinstated for next year, please?
I think that's a very good idea. I'm not exactly sure that it is within the dates, but it strikes me. And I'd like to thank everyone for attending and those members of the public for watching via YouTube, and that's the end of the meeting.